Colonel Harris strode into the Colorado Springs military base cafeteria, his polished boots clicking against the linoleum floor in a rhythm that commanded attention even before he spoke. He had the kind of presence that filled a room, tall, broad-shouldered, perfectly groomed, with a gaze sharp enough to cut through steel. Soldiers and officers instinctively straightened as he passed, some out of respect, others out of mild fear. Harris was known as much for his tactical brilliance as he was for his sarcasm. His mocking tone could cut deeper than a knife, and he had never met anyone who could withstand it. Today, however, he was simply bored. The routine of base life, meetings, and endless reports had drained the usual thrill from his mornings, leaving him restless and eager for something to break the monotony. The cafeteria itself was a hive of activity, though muted compared to a normal city mess hall. Soldiers in crisp uniforms moved with practiced precision, trays in hand, searching for empty tables or seating near familiar colleagues. Conversation buzzed in low tones, discussing drills, deployments, and occasionally gossip, but nothing particularly noteworthy caught Harris' attention until he saw her. She sat alone at a small round table in the far corner, her posture upright yet casual, hands wrapped around a simple coffee mug, her gaze focused somewhere between thought and detachment. What drew his attention immediately wasn't her presence. It was the fact that she was wearing a civilian jacket, faded and slightly worn, out of place in a sea of immaculate military attire. The jacket didn't bear the usual patches or insignias that marked rank or unit. It looked like something you could buy off a street corner or find in a second-hand shop. Harris' eyes narrowed. A part of him, the part that thrived on observation and control, immediately catalogued everything about her. Hair tied loosely at the nape of her neck, strands falling over her sharp gray eyes. A faint scar near her right temple, just visible above the collar of the jacket. Hands slender but firm, with knuckles slightly calloused. Even the way she held the coffee mug, it was calm, deliberate, and measured. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, yet Harris recognized it immediately. This was someone used to observation, someone used to surviving, someone who had been in situations where hesitation could mean disaster. A smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. Here was a civilian, entirely out of place, and it was practically begging to be mocked. Harris had the habit of asserting dominance, and today seemed like the perfect opportunity. He moved closer, his polished boots making soft, confident taps on the floor, drawing the attention of nearby privates. Wrong place for civilians. "Miss," he said, his voice sharp but laced with amusement. "Did you get lost on the tour?" Heads turned, some snickered. A few rolled their eyes. It was classic Harris. Civilians usually flinched, stammered, or apologized. But this woman, nothing. She continued sipping her coffee as though he weren't even there. The lack of reaction only piqued Harris' curiosity, and for the first time in years, he felt a flicker of irritation at a civilian who refused to be intimidated. Harris leaned casually against the back of a chair across from her, smirk still in place. "That jacket," he said, tilting his head to examine it, "looks like it came from a thrift store. Do you even know what day it is, or are you just wandering through life in a fog?" He expected a weak chuckle, an embarrassed glance, something to affirm his superiority. She finally looked at him, and the effect was immediate. Gray eyes, cold and sharp, locked onto his, steady and unyielding. There was no fear, no surprise, no submission, only calm, absolute focus, as though she had been expecting him. Harris blinked, caught off guard by the intensity of her gaze. Civilians did not look like this. Civilians did not radiate quiet authority. "Colonel Harris," she said finally, her voice low but precise, cutting through the cafeteria chatter. She pronounced his full name without hesitation, almost as if she had been briefed, almost as if she already knew everything about him. "Do you always mock those you've never met?" Her words were direct, yet measured. Harris felt a twinge of unease, something he hadn't experienced in decades. Most people, especially civilians, didn't have the audacity to address him so bluntly. But what unsettled him more than her confidence was the subtle weight in her tone, a weight that hinted at experience, endurance, and something far beyond his understanding. He leaned slightly forward, resting his elbows on the back of the chair, maintaining his smirk, but hiding the sudden flicker of curiosity in his eyes. "And what if I do?" he asked smoothly, masking the unexpected respect that began to seep in. "You seem unusually calm for someone out of uniform." The woman tilted her head just enough for a stray lock of dark hair to fall across her forehead. She brushed it aside casually, revealing the subtle shimmer of an emblem stitched onto her shoulder, a raven, black as midnight, so finely sewn that it caught the cafeteria's fluorescent lights in a strange, almost deliberate gleam. Harris froze. He knew that emblem instantly. The raven insignia, a mark of the legendary 3,000 meters unit. Only a handful of people in the world had ever worn it. The unit existed more as rumor than reality, whispered about in war colleges, clandestine reports, and classified files. They operated in conditions so extreme, so perilous, that even elite Special Forces units deferred to their expertise. Survival at 3,000 meters above sea level was no small feat. Yet here she was, sitting calmly, sipping coffee in a civilian jacket, with that insignia stitched on her sleeve as if it were nothing more than decoration. Harris' smirk faltered. For the first time in decades, he felt a sense of hesitation creep into his chest. The cafeteria noise seemed to fade, replaced by the silent weight of recognition. He wasn't just looking at a civilian, he was staring at someone who had survived. The impossible, someone who had lived where most men never returned, someone who had likely seen horrors he could only read about in top-secret files. Nearby soldiers began to notice the shift in the colonel's demeanor. A sergeant, tall and disciplined, leaned slightly forward, eyes narrowing as he glimpsed the insignia. His jaw tightened. Harris raised a hand sharply, silencing him before he could speak. "Not yet," he muttered, almost to himself, though the woman's gaze didn't waver. "You know what this is, Colonel," she said finally, voice soft but firm. "That jacket isn't for fashion. It's for memory." Harris swallowed hard, his throat dry for reasons he couldn't quite articulate. The calm, unshakable presence of this woman, seated in a civilian jacket, now seemed charged with authority that no rank could challenge. Harris shifted in his chair, trying to regain control, yet every instinct in his body screamed caution. He had studied files on the Raven unit, but never expected to meet a member face to face. The rumors were whispered in the shadows for a reason. They didn't seek recognition, didn't boast of their feats. They delivered results where everyone else failed. Now one sat before him, sipping coffee and exuding a quiet, lethal calm. 3,000 meters above sea level, she continued, as if reading his thoughts. Rank doesn't matter. Survival does. Endurance does. Strategy does. Harris could feel the weight of her words pressing against him. He recalled stories of missions in the Hindu Kush, of operations where helicopters couldn't land, and the weather had beaten every unit into retreat. Yet somehow, the Ravens had succeeded, quietly, efficiently, leaving no trace but results. Harris realized he was no longer merely observing a civilian. He was confronting a living legend. Every step she had taken, every decision she had made, had been measured against death, chaos, and impossible odds. And now she sat before him, entirely human, yet carrying the aura of a unit that had defied the limits of human endurance. The silence between them grew heavier, the cafeteria's normal buzz fading into background white noise. Harris' usual sarcasm seemed almost childish in the face of this woman's calm authority. She tilted the coffee mug slightly, her eyes never leaving his, and took a small sip, deliberate, controlled, unhurried. He realized then that this encounter was no ordinary meeting. It was a test. Harris adjusted his posture, straightening his back, but feeling the weight of something far greater than his rank pressing down. The woman set her mug on the table, fingers lingering over the edge as if marking a boundary. She leaned slightly forward, gaze unwavering. Harris could feel the magnetic pull of her presence, silent, commanding, impossible to ignore. "I've seen men like you," she said softly. "Those who think authority comes from titles, ribbons, and medals. Authority," she paused, letting the word linger, "comes from what you endure when no one is watching. When survival is the only proof." Harris' smirk vanished. He felt a rare, humbling awareness. The cafeteria was no longer filled with soldiers and chatter. It was filled with the weight of history, of impossible missions, of scars that couldn't be seen but were unmistakably earned. And here, in a faded civilian jacket, sat the proof. He leaned back slightly, trying to regain composure, though he knew it was futile. Civilians he could mock. Officers he could intimidate. But legends commanded respect without saying a word. And this woman, with her raven insignia and calm gray eyes, was nothing short of a legend. Harris sat frozen for a long moment, his mind racing as he stared at the raven insignia stitched onto the woman's shoulder. That simple emblem, black on faded fabric, was a symbol that carried weight far beyond any badge or ribbon he had earned. He had read about the Raven unit countless times in classified briefings, but no report, no dossier, no whispered rumor could have prepared him for the reality of seeing one of its members in the flesh. The woman lifted her eyes to meet his, unflinching. There was no arrogance in her gaze, no attempt to intimidate. Yet, in its quiet, unwavering intensity, Harris felt as if every secret, every danger he had ever encountered, had suddenly sharpened and focused on him. She didn't speak for a moment, letting the silence stretch and grow. Around them, the cafeteria continued its routine, oblivious to the tension at the corner table. Most soldiers were busy with their trays, absorbed in conversation or the mundane rhythm of eating and planning drills. Yet a few sharp-eyed sergeants noticed the unusual stillness of their commander, and curiosity stirred. Harris finally cleared, his throat attempting to reclaim some semblance of authority. I assume you know what that emblem represents?" His voice, normally so confident, faltered slightly. He expected her to dismiss him or ignore the question. Instead, her lips curved into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "I do," she said simply, voice even and deliberate. "And I also know the type of man who mocks civilians in uniformed halls." Her words struck him harder than any insult could have. She wasn't angry. She wasn't defensive. She was stating a fact, and in her world, facts carried more weight than sarcasm or ridicule. Harris swallowed, a lump forming in his throat. He had been trained to analyze, to anticipate, to dominate conversation, to command respect. Yet here, he was caught off guard by someone who had no obligation to him, someone who had survived the unimaginable and carried it effortlessly in her presence. He leaned back slightly, studying her. The emblem of the Raven unit had been a mystery to most. Few soldiers had seen it. Fewer still understood its significance. The unit's history was almost mythical. Elite reconnaissance and survival operatives, trained to function where oxygen thinned and death lingered like a shadow. They operated at extreme altitudes, far beyond the limits of ordinary soldiers. Most missions were classified. Almost no official records existed, and those who returned spoke little of what they had endured. Harris had always respected the idea. of the ravens, yet that respect was academic, theoretical. Until now, he had never truly grasped the human weight of their accomplishments. "You know what's unusual about you?" Harris asked, his voice low and cautious, almost involuntarily respectful. "You're here, in civilian clothing, and yet you carry yourself like you've walked through hell and come back untouched." The woman's eyes softened slightly, as if acknowledging the faint truth in his observation, yet her gaze never wavered. "Surviving hell doesn't make you untouchable," she said quietly. "It just means you've learned how to move through it without letting it consume you. Those who wear this emblem don't seek recognition. We're measured by results, by whether the mission succeeds, not by applause or medals." Harris nodded slowly, absorbing her words. It was clear now that this wasn't a woman who wore the raven insignia for show. She wore it because it symbolized the quiet endurance of those who had faced unimaginable odds and lived. The faint scar on her temple, the careful movements, the calm of her presence all spoke of someone who had confronted extreme danger countless times, someone who had learned the subtle art of survival. Around them, the atmosphere in the cafeteria began to shift. Soldiers and officers, who had initially been distracted by their meals, began to notice the tension at the corner table. Whispers started to spread, low and hesitant at first. Could it be? The uncertainty in their voices was tinged with awe. The woman remained entirely unperturbed, sipping her coffee as if the small murmurs around her were irrelevant, a distant hum beneath her awareness. Harris studied her hands, resting lightly on the table, fingers relaxed but not soft. Calluses betrayed strength and repeated use. Subtle scars hinted at injuries healed without ceremony. Every detail of her presence communicated experience, discipline, and precision. He realized then that the Raven unit's reputation wasn't built on rumors alone. It was forged in the subtle, almost invisible marks that only someone who had endured death repeatedly could carry. "I've read the reports," Harris said cautiously, "the ones the Pentagon hides behind red tape. But you're different. The reports don't prepare a man for what it means to see a raven in the flesh." His words came out quieter than he intended, almost a confession. She nodded slightly, acknowledging his admission without condescension. "Reports only capture results," she said. "They never capture the struggle, the fear, the choice to keep moving when every instinct tells you to stop. That's the difference between surviving and merely existing." Harris felt a shiver run down his spine. He had commanded men in combat zones, faced ambushes, and navigated crises that demanded every ounce of his skill. And yet, sitting across from this woman, he felt a humbling awareness of his own limitations. She had survived what most could not imagine, and she carried it with quiet grace. The sergeant who had noticed the emblem earlier approached cautiously, unsure whether to speak. Harris raised a hand subtly, signaling him to wait. The last thing he wanted was to draw attention prematurely. Instead, he leaned slightly closer, his curiosity overriding the usual strictures of military decorum. "You've been on missions beyond any of our understanding," Harris said, voice steadier now, tinged with admiration. "And yet you sit here like any ordinary person. How do you reconcile it? How do you live with what others would call impossible?" The woman tilted her head slightly, as though considering the question carefully. "You don't reconcile it," she said softly. "You move forward. You focus on what must be done. Survival becomes habit, not glory. And when you sit down for a coffee in a base cafeteria, you do so fully aware of everything behind you and everything ahead of you, but without needing to prove it to anyone." Harris exhaled slowly. The calm authority of her words, the absolute control in her presence, made him realize the absurdity of his earlier mockery. He had assumed she was vulnerable, an easy target for sarcasm. Instead, she was untouchable, not because of rank or accolades, but because she had endured the impossible and emerged intact. The whispers in the cafeteria grew louder, but the woman remained entirely composed. Harris realized the story of the Raven unit had come alive in front of him. The legend was no exaggeration, and the emblem was no mere decoration. It was a testament, a symbol of survival, endurance, and quiet authority. "Colonel," she said finally, voice steady, "I don't wear this emblem to intimidate or impress. I wear it to remember the people I've lost, the missions. That nearly killed me, and the commitment required to keep moving when failure is not an option." Harris felt a profound respect settle over him, replacing the arrogance and irritation he had brought into the cafeteria. He understood now that this was not a civilian. This was a soldier of the highest order, someone whose authority transcended rank, medals, and formal recognition. He had underestimated her foolishly, recklessly, and he would not make that mistake again. For a long moment, neither spoke, and the silence was filled with unspoken understanding. Around them, the cafeteria carried on as usual, but Harris' world had shifted. He had been schooled, humbled, and confronted by someone who represented the very limits of human endurance and the quiet power of survival. Finally, Harris broke the silence, his voice quieter than before, but carrying a new respect. "You've earned that emblem," he said simply, "more than anyone I've ever met." The woman's lips curved into the faintest of smiles, almost imperceptible, and she returned her gaze to her coffee. No words were needed. Harris understood. Respect was not demanded. It was recognized silently by those who knew its true meaning. And in that moment, he knew he was in the presence of a living legend. The cafeteria's chatter had become a distant hum in Colonel Harris' ears. Every bite of food, every clatter of trays, felt irrelevant compared to the presence of the woman before him. Her gray eyes, calm and piercing, held a weight that no rank, no medal, and no command could rival. She was not merely sitting in a civilian jacket. She was a living emblem of survival, endurance, and the quiet authority that could not be taught. Harris had stared down insurgents, negotiated ceasefires, and commanded troops in life-or-death situations, yet the sensation she evoked was something entirely different. He leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on the edge of the table, trying to collect his thoughts. Soldiers nearby had begun to whisper cautiously, sensing the unusual tension. A young lieutenant nudged his colleague and muttered, "Sir, do you think she's really?" But no one finished the sentence. Even officers who prided themselves on their composure were now hesitant, eyes flicking nervously toward the table in the far corner. Harris knew. He had to know. "You've been on missions that are classified to the point that most people think your unit doesn't exist," he said, voice low, controlled. "Tell me, how does someone survive that?" The woman's lips curved into the faintest of smiles, and she tilted her head slightly, as if assessing whether he was ready to understand. "Survival," she said, voice measured, "isn't about bravery, nor is it about skill alone. It's about discipline, preparation, and instinct, honed over countless missions where the stakes are life itself. You don't succeed because you want to. You succeed because failing is not an option." Harris felt the weight of her words settle over him. He had always prided himself on precision and strategy, yet hearing her speak in this calm, unflinching manner made him realize that all the simulations, drills, and intelligence reports in the world could never prepare a man for the raw endurance demanded by the Raven unit. And she was not just a member, she had survived where few even had the chance. He shifted in his chair, studying her carefully. The jacket, worn and faded, concealed more than it revealed. Small tears, faintly scorched edges, and a subtle stiffness near the shoulder suggested repairs done in the field, in conditions far removed from the comfort of a repair shop. This jacket was more than clothing. It was a record of survival, a silent testimony to experiences most men could not imagine. Harris realized he had mocked not a civilian, but a living archive of impossible missions. A sergeant approached again, quieter this time, as if afraid to disrupt the moment. Harris raised a hand subtly, signaling him to wait. The sergeant froze, eyes wide with recognition, and slowly backed away. Even within the military, few could claim familiarity with the Raven unit, and fewer still would dare approach a member without permission. Harris appreciated the instinctive caution. It spoke to the reputation that had long preceded her, rumors that bordered on myth. "I've seen reports," Harris admitted carefully, lowering his voice further, "but reports never capture the magnitude of what you've endured. They can't describe what it's like to operate in conditions where even the air itself becomes a weapon." He hesitated, choosing his words. "And yet here you are, sitting quietly with coffee, as though nothing extraordinary has happened." The woman tilted her head again, eyes softening just slightly. "Because extraordinary is a matter of perspective," she said quietly. "For those who have survived, the impossible becomes ordinary. The danger, the fear, they become part of the rhythm of life. When a mission ends, you do not seek accolades. You assess, you prepare, and you continue. Survival is not celebrated. It is remembered quietly, in actions rather than words." Harris felt an odd mix of awe and unease. Her composure was absolute, yet it carried a subtle challenge. She did not need to assert dominance. Her very presence did that. He realized for the first time that authority, real authority, was not dictated by medals, ribbons, or rank. It was earned in the crucible of endurance, measured not in commands, given but in the ability to persist when every resource has failed and every instinct screams to give up. Around them, whispers grew louder. Soldiers began to glance at the Raven insignia again, as if seeing it with new eyes. A few younger lieutenants leaned toward each other, whispering questions, curiosity, and awe tangled in their voices. Harris, however, was focused entirely on the woman. He noticed every detail, the slight tension in her hands, the faint scar along her temple, the meticulous way she carried herself despite the casual attire. Nothing about her was accidental. Every motion suggested experience, precision, and an ingrained understanding of how to survive where others could not. "Colonel," she said softly, breaking the silence, "do you understand why your mockery does not intimidate me?" Harris shook his head slowly, wary of the answer. "Because," she continued, her voice steady and unyielding, "I have faced situations where intimidation was irrelevant, where lives depended not on who shouted the loudest, but who acted with clarity and resolve. You may command rank and medals, but I command survival. And that," she gestured subtly toward the insignia, "is not something taught in a classroom or earned by ceremony. It is earned by enduring the impossible." Harris leaned back, his usual arrogance stripped away. He had never been humbled in this way, never confronted someone whose authority was absolute and unspoken. He realized the magnitude of what he was witnessing. Not a civilian, not even a typical soldier, but someone who embodied the legend of the Raven unit. He had studied their history, read the reports, and even trained troops based on the intelligence. He had, but the reality was more formidable than he could have imagined. The woman finally took a sip of her coffee, emotion deliberate, controlled, as if every movement were a reflection of discipline forged over countless missions. Harris felt a pang of self-awareness. He had mocked her before knowing a single detail about her identity, unaware that the very emblem he had almost dismissed carried the weight of legendary survival. "You wear the emblem openly," Harris said cautiously. "Why?" Why not keep it hidden, as most legends do? She looked down at her jacket, fingers lightly brushing the fabric, revealing subtle repairs along the seams. Because this is not for others to see, she replied. It is for those who know, for those who understand the weight it carries. And for myself, it is a reminder of what I have endured and what I continue to endure. Recognition is unnecessary. Memory is essential. Harris' mind raced. He understood now why few members of the Raven unit were ever seen in public, why their missions were often whispered about, and why even elite forces deferred to their expertise. The emblem was more than a symbol. It was a living record, a testament to survival against impossible odds. And here she was, living proof, sitting quietly in a civilian jacket that had witnessed more than most uniforms ever would. The sergeant, who had been observing, finally retreated, sensing that even proximity required caution. Harris remained seated, absorbing the quiet weight of the encounter. Around them, the cafeteria's normal rhythm resumed, though soldiers' glances flicked repeatedly toward the corner table. Some whispered to each other, curiosity mixed with reverence. A few younger soldiers stared openly, mesmerized by the calm authority she radiated. Yet she remained entirely unshaken, as though the world outside the emblem's shadow was inconsequential. "You've seen the impossible," Harris said finally, voice almost a whisper. "And yet you exist here, quietly, as if nothing extraordinary has happened." She smiled faintly, eyes soft but unwavering. "Extraordinary is relative," she said. "For those who survive, ordinary becomes extraordinary only when others recognize it. For me, survival itself is ordinary. My actions, my endurance, they are neither boastful nor exceptional. They are necessary." Harris felt a deep sense of awe settle over him. For decades, he had commanded men, faced death in battle, and carried responsibility that weighed heavily on his chest. And yet, in this single encounter, he realized that his accolades, his medals, and his rank were hollow compared to the authority embodied by the quiet, unassuming woman across the table. She was not seeking recognition. She did not need to assert dominance. She was legend, and her legend required no audience. The Raven insignia glimmered faintly in the fluorescent light, a subtle reminder of survival, endurance, and the silent power of the Raven unit. Harris leaned back, exhaling slowly, the realization settling in. He had been humbled, confronted not by arrogance or ceremony, but by someone whose authority transcended all formal structures. Colonel Harris leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on the woman as though trying to dissect her very being. Every detail seemed deliberate, the way her shoulders remained square despite the relaxed civilian jacket, the calm precision of her movements, the subtle strength that emanated from every gesture. He had faced countless threats, from insurgents in harsh terrain to tense negotiations in foreign capitals. Yet the presence before him felt like a force far beyond rank, weaponry, or strategy. She was a legend made flesh, and he could feel the weight of history pressing down on him. Around them, the cafeteria's atmosphere had shifted subtly. Soldiers who had been oblivious moments ago now stole glances at the corner table, whispers rippling through the room like a quiet tide. "Is that? Could it really be?" Lieutenant voices trembled with disbelief, yet no one dared speak directly to the woman. Harris noticed the deference, almost instinctive, in their glances. Even seasoned officers, trained to observe, couldn't hide their recognition of the insignia or the aura it carried. Harris forced himself to focus. He had spent years cultivating authority, relying on intelligence, experience, and rank. And yet, here was someone whose presence demanded respect without a single overt gesture. He realized, uncomfortably, that he had entered this encounter with mockery on his lips and emerged entirely unprepared for the reality of the Raven unit. You've endured missions that would break entire platoons, Harris said quietly, voice tinged with a mixture of awe and disbelief. I've read reports, top-secret briefings, but nothing prepares a man for the human side of it. How do you survive such extremes and remain ordinary? The woman's gray eyes softened slightly, though her gaze never wavered. Ordinary, she said, is a matter of perspective. Survival is never ordinary, but those who endure it quietly, without seeking recognition, become invisible to those who cannot fathom it. We do not operate for applause or acknowledgement. We operate because failure is not an option, because lives depend on it, because the mission must succeed. Recognition is a luxury. Endurance is necessity. Harris studied her closely. He noted the subtle scars along her hands and wrists, calluses shaped by rigorous activity, the faint but precise stitching along the torn seams of her jacket repairs done in the field, where perfection was impossible, but necessity demanded functionality. Every detail spoke of discipline, resilience, and countless hours surviving conditions that would have ended lesser soldiers. The jacket was no longer merely clothing. It was a record of her life, a testament to her endurance, and a symbol of the Raven Unit's silent authority. Tell me, Harris said, voice low, why reveal this here? Why wear the insignia openly in a cafeteria, filled with soldiers who have no understanding of what it represents? The woman brushed a stray lock of hair behind her ear, fingers, brushing the Raven emblem lightly. Because this is not for them, she said softly. It is for me, and for those who understand its meaning. The emblem is a reminder, not for recognition, not for glory, but to remember what has been endured and what is yet to come. It is a symbol of responsibility, of preparation, of survival at the edge of human capability. Harris felt a sudden pang of humility. He had spent decades measuring authority by rank and medals, by command and accolades. Here, authority was something deeper, something intrinsic, earned not through ceremony, but through endurance, skill, and survival. He had mocked her presence, yet she had already assumed dominance simply by existing in this room. The whispers in the cafeteria grew louder, and a few younger soldiers dared to murmur in hushed tones, "That's the Raven Unit." It can't be. Harris noticed the reverence in their voices. Even those unfamiliar with the unit's history sensed that something extraordinary was in their midst. The woman, however, remained entirely composed, as if the room itself were an inconsequential backdrop to the weight of her own experience. You've operated where even special forces feared to go, Harris continued, leaning forward slightly. High-altitude missions, extreme terrain, hostile conditions where most units wouldn't even attempt insertion. And yet you remain composed, calm, almost serene. How? Her gaze swept the cafeteria, taking in the soldiers, the officers, the ambient noise, and then returned to him unwavering. Because chaos teaches discipline, fear teaches focus, and survival teaches humility. In the mountains, in hostile territory, at 3,000 meters above sea level, there is no room for ego or arrogance. You either endure, adapt, and succeed, or you fail. That is the difference between surviving and living. And that difference is reflected in every action, every decision, every moment of existence in the field. Harris felt a deep respect settle over him. He had commanded soldiers in combat zones, faced ambushes, and navigated crises that demanded every ounce of his skill and courage. Yet he had never encountered anyone who embodied the essence of survival in such a concentrated, unassuming form. She was not seeking validation. She was not demonstrating power. She simply existed, and her existence carried a weight that no military rank could replicate. Around them, a few soldiers began whispering again, this time more deliberately, some daring to exchange glances that betrayed awe. Harris realized that even in casual conversation, she commanded attention, Not through intimidation or threat, but through the quiet force of experience and the aura of accomplishment. It was a reminder that true authority was invisible to those who had not endured its weight. "You've been on missions where failure meant death," Harris said softly, "and yet you carry yourself here with ease. How do you reconcile what you've seen with this mundane life?" She took a small sip of her coffee, deliberately, controlled, as if every motion were calculated. "The mundane is necessary," she said. "It preserves balance. But it does not diminish the extraordinary. One lives in both worlds simultaneously immersed in daily life, while carrying the memory and preparation of extremes. This balance allows us to function, to endure, and to act decisively when required. To be effective, one must honor both the ordinary and the extraordinary, without letting either consume the other." Harris was silent, absorbing the weight of her words. His mind raced, recalling classified reports, rumors whispered in intelligence circles, and stories of survival that had once seemed impossible. Here was the living embodiment of those legends, sitting casually in a civilian jacket that bore the scars of experience far greater than most men could endure in a lifetime. "You command respect," Harris said finally, voice quieter, almost reverent. "Not because of rank, but because of what you've endured." The woman's lips curved into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "Respect is not demanded, Colonel. It is earned in silence, through action and endurance, through survival when no one is watching. Recognition is unnecessary. Understanding is enough." Harris exhaled slowly, the weight of realization settling over him. He had mocked her arrival, underestimated her presence, and yet here he was, humbled, confronted not by arrogance or ceremony, but by someone whose authority transcended all formal structures. She was living proof of the Raven Unit's legend, proof that the human spirit could endure where ordinary training and skill failed. He studied the insignia again, the raven stitched in black thread on her shoulder. It glimmered faintly under the cafeteria's fluorescent lights, a subtle but potent reminder of survival, resilience, and quiet authority. Harris leaned back in his chair, feeling the hollow weight of his own medals and ribbons. For the first time in decades, he realized that true strength, true command, did not come from outward display. It came from experience, endurance, and the ability to survive the impossible. The woman finished her coffee, placing the cup carefully on the tray. She remained seated, calm, composed, yet her presence radiated something that could not be ignored. Harris felt the faintest chill of awareness. He was in the presence of someone who had defied death repeatedly and emerged intact, someone whose quiet power was unmatched. Around them, the cafeteria had resumed its normal rhythm, but whispers continued to ripple through the soldiers. They sensed the aura of legend, even if they could not comprehend its full magnitude. Harris, however, was no longer concerned with what others thought. His focus was entirely on the woman, on the living history sitting before him, on the embodiment of endurance, survival, and quiet command that no official rank could ever replicate. Colonel Harris remained seated, silent for a moment, as the woman's calm authority continued to press upon him. The cafeteria, now a blur of chatter and clinking trays, felt like a distant backdrop. All focus had narrowed to the corner table. Where she sat, the raven insignia on her jacket, a stark reminder of the legend she embodied. Harris couldn't tear his eyes away from her, from the aura of experience and quiet command she radiated. Every gesture, every breath, seemed measured, intentional, and born of countless missions where precision and survival were inseparable. Finally, he asked, voice low and deliberate, "You've been on missions where the odds were impossible. I've read the files, the briefings, but they're fragments. They don't capture the reality. Can you tell me a glimpse of what it's like?" The woman's gaze softened, though her eyes retained that steel gray edge. The files tell you what we do. They don't tell you how we survive. Conditions aren't just extreme. They are hostile to life itself. Thin air at 3,000 meters above sea level. Temperatures that numb the body. Storms that could sweep a man away in minutes. The terrain itself is a weapon, and the enemy is ever present. Every step demands calculation. Every breath is deliberate. Harris leaned forward instinctively, captivated. And yet you succeed. Every mission, you survive. How? She paused, considering her words. Because we cannot fail. There is no margin for error. Every decision is amplified by consequences. One misstep, one lapse in judgment, and you're lost. But we endure because of training, preparation, and instinct honed to the edge. Each mission becomes a test of body and mind. And those who endure, we carry the weight of it silently, without recognition. That is the cost of operating where others cannot. Harris felt a shiver run down his spine. He had commanded soldiers in combat zones, faced ambushes, explosions, and hostile terrain, but nothing had prepared him for the reality conveyed by her words. The precision of survival she described, the discipline required, and the endurance necessary to navigate such extremes went far beyond anything he had experienced. He had studied tactics, strategy, and logistics for decades. Yet he understood now that the Raven unit operated on a level that was almost incomprehensible. You've faced hostile terrain, enemy forces, and conditions where most would perish, Harris said carefully. Yet here you sit, calm, composed, almost serene. How do you reconcile what you've endured with a normal life? The woman lifted her mug, taking a slow, deliberate sip, as though measuring the pause itself. There is no reconciliation, she said finally. The past missions remain a part of us. The danger, the fear, the choices, these are etched into our consciousness. Yet we move forward. We function in the ordinary world while carrying the extraordinary within us. Survival teaches humility, patience, and discipline. Ordinary life is the stage on which we test these lessons without drawing attention. We endure, silently for the mission, for our comrades, for the principle that failure is not an option. Harris felt a profound sense of awe. He had been humbled, confronted by someone whose authority transcended rank and medals. Every detail of her presence spoke of experience, precision, and survival. Even her casual posture was deliberate, controlled, the product of countless missions where hesitation could mean death. The Raven unit's legend was no longer abstract. He was living proof of it, sitting quietly across the table. He noticed the scars along her hands, calluses shaped by countless hours in harsh conditions, the faint stitching along the seams of her jacket, repairs done with care in the field, under conditions where perfection was impossible. The jacket was not clothing, it was testimony. Each mark told a story, a silent record of survival, endurance, and resilience. Harris realized he had mocked the wrong person earlier, and the weight of his error settled in his chest. You've carried comrades through impossible situations, he said, voice quieter now. You've survived where others would have fallen. And yet, the mission always came first. She nodded, eyes unwavering. The mission is the only constant. Lives depend on it. Failure is not just a personal risk. It is a liability to those who trust us to succeed. The Raven unit does not operate for recognition. We operate because it is necessary, because others cannot, and because someone must endure where failure is inevitable for others. Each mission tests not just skill, but the human spirit itself. And when it ends, when survival is achieved, we move forward quietly, silently, without fanfare. Harris exhaled slowly. He had commanded units in high-stakes operations, but he realized now that he had never truly understood the nature of courage, endurance, or silent authority until this moment. This woman, this Raven, had faced extremes that he could only imagine, and she carried it all with effortless poise. It was a humbling realization, one that stripped away years of assumption and arrogance. Around them, the whispers in the cafeteria grew, though no one dared approach. Soldiers exchanged glances, some nervous, some awed. A few younger lieutenants dared to murmur questions under their breath. Curiosity mingled with reverence. Harris noticed it all, but was entirely absorbed by the woman. She radiated calm authority, quiet command, and the kind of presence that demanded respect without force. "You've endured conditions that are hostile to life itself." Harris sighed, voice tinged with disbelief. "And yet, you act with composure, focus, and clarity. How do you maintain it?" She looked around the cafeteria for a brief moment, eyes sweeping across the soldiers and officers before returning to him. "Discipline," she said simply. "Preparation, awareness, and understanding that every action has consequences. When you operate at extreme altitudes, in dangerous terrain, under enemy threat, panic is not an option. Hesitation is fatal. Composure is survival. Focus is everything. The Raven unit does not rely on luck or chance. We rely on preparation, adaptability, and the ability to endure where others fail." Harris leaned back, absorbing her words. He realized that all the military strategy, planning, and command he had mastered over decades paled in comparison to the skills required to survive the missions she described. The Raven unit was not just elite. It was something beyond comprehension, a force shaped by extreme endurance, training, and the unforgiving reality of life and death scenarios that ordinary soldiers could never experience. "You don't seek recognition?" Harris said finally. "Yet here you are, and everyone in this room can sense it. They recognize something extraordinary, even if they don't understand it." Her eyes softened faintly. "Recognition is unnecessary. Understanding is enough. Those who survive the impossible do not need validation. We measure ourselves by outcomes, by whether the mission succeeds, by whether we return. The rest is irrelevant. Authority is not given. It is inherent, earned in silence through endurance and action. Those who cannot comprehend it will never see it. Those who can will recognize it without words." Harris felt a deep sense of humility settle over him. He had mocked her arrival, dismissed her presence, and yet she had already assumed command of his attention and respect. He understood now that true authority, true power, was invisible to those who had not endured the extremes she had faced. She was not just a soldier. She was a living testament to the limits of human endurance. The Raven insignia glimmered faintly. In the cafeteria light, a subtle but potent symbol of survival, resilience, and quiet command. Harris realized that his own medals and ribbons, once sources of pride, felt hollow in comparison. Here was proof of the extraordinary, living quietly. In a civilian jacket, unassuming, yet undeniable in presence. Finally, she placed her coffee cup carefully on the tray, fingers lingering briefly over the emblem, as if reaffirming its meaning. "Colonel," she said softly, "do not mistake humility for weakness. Survival requires strength beyond what medals can represent, beyond what words can convey. Authority is silent, earned in action, and carried through endurance. Remember that." Harris exhaled, the weight of realization pressing upon him. He had encountered legends in reports, in stories, and in classified briefings, but he had never truly met one until now. And the lesson was undeniable. He had mocked a civilian, yet had been confronted by something far greater, a living embodiment of the Raven unit's legendary authority and survival. Colonel Harris remained seated, his gaze fixed on the woman as the chatter of the cafeteria faded into a distant hum. Every detail of her presence subtle, deliberate, yet commanding, held him captive. He realized, almost reluctantly, that he had been naive to think a civilian jacket could mask authority. This was no ordinary soldier. This was someone whose very existence embodied survival, discipline, and experience honed under extremes most could not imagine. The raven emblem on her jacket glimmered faintly under the fluorescent lights, a stark reminder of the countless missions she had endured. Each thread told a story of endurance, danger, and skill that went beyond anything Harris had witnessed firsthand. The insignia was not decorative. It was a testament to a life lived at the edge, where every step could mean survival or disaster. Harris leaned back in his chair, a sense of reverence settling over him. "I've faced dangers," he said slowly, "seen men die, commanded missions where the odds were slim. And yet, I can't begin to comprehend the reality of what you've endured. How do you keep moving forward after everything?" Her gray eyes met his, calm yet unwavering. "You move forward because the alternative is impossible," she said softly. "Each mission tests limits beyond imagination. Each step in hostile terrain, each decision under extreme stress, requires complete focus. Fear, doubt, and hesitation are luxuries you cannot afford. Survival is the result of discipline, preparation, and instinct honed to perfection. And when the mission ends, you do not celebrate. You reflect, you learn, and you continue. Life is both ordinary and extraordinary at once, and balance is essential." Harris nodded slowly, absorbing her words. He had commanded troops, endured crises, and strategized under immense pressure, yet none of that compared to the focus and precision she described. The Raven unit did not merely operate. It endured, mastered, and conquered environments and situations where others failed. And she, in her calm, unassuming way, carried the weight of all of it with effortless poise. A few younger soldiers had begun whispering again, glances furtive, eyes wide. "Is she?" One murmured. Harris noticed the mixture of awe and nervous excitement in their demeanor. The presence of a Raven unit operative was something almost mythical in their world, and yet here she was, sitting casually with coffee, completely at ease. Harris realized the lesson extended beyond himself. Everyone in the room who noticed her was learning the subtle power of endurance and quiet authority. "You've endured extreme conditions," Harris said, voice quieter now. "Hostile terrain, impossible missions, high altitudes, and threats where ordinary units would fail. And yet, you carry yourself with calm precision. How do you maintain that composure?" The woman took a slow, deliberate sip of her coffee, every movement controlled. "Because composure is survival," she replied. "Hesitation can be fatal. Panic is lethal. Discipline, clarity, and focus are non-negotiable. The Raven unit trains its members to operate at the edge of human capability, where survival is a choice earned moment by moment. Ordinary life is different, but the same principles apply: precision, focus, and awareness. Carrying experience without arrogance is essential. Authority is silent and earned, never demanded." Harris leaned forward, fascinated and humbled. "And yet, despite everything, you remain. Ordinary in appearance. That jacket, those casual clothes, they don't hint at the magnitude of your achievements." She brushed a stray lock of hair behind her ear, fingers grazing the emblem lightly. "Ordinary is deliberate," she said. "We do not seek recognition. The world need not know our feats. Survival is not about glory. It is about responsibility, preparation, and execution. The jacket conceals as much as it reveals. It is a reminder of what has been endured and what is yet to come." Harris exhaled slowly. He had mocked her upon first seeing the civilian jacket, thinking it incongruous with military decorum. Now he understood his error. The jacket symbolized control, subtlety, and experience far beyond ordinary comprehension. Every detail, every subtle mark, was evidence of survival and quiet mastery. "You've carried comrades through situations others could not even imagine," Harris said, voice tinged with awe. "You've survived where most would have fallen. And yet, the mission always came first." She nodded, eyes unwavering. "The mission is never secondary. Lives depend on success, and failure is not an option. The Raven unit exists to endure where others cannot. Recognition is irrelevant. Results matter. Discipline, endurance, and survival are paramount. Every mission shapes you, tests you, and refines your instincts. And when it ends, you reflect silently, prepare, and move forward. Survival is a continuous process, not a single achievement." Harris felt a mixture of humility and admiration wash over him. He had trained soldiers, led them into danger, and faced countless crises, but nothing had prepared him for this encounter. Here was someone whose quiet authority eclipsed rank, medals, and ceremony. She did not demand respect. She commanded it effortlessly through presence, experience, and mastery of survival. The cafeteria seemed smaller, quieter, as if the room itself had acknowledged the intensity of her presence. Soldiers stole glances, some wide-eyed, others whispering hesitantly. Even officers who were usually confident and composed could not hide their awe. Harris realized that the story of the Raven unit was alive and tangible in front of him, embodied by a woman who could sit calmly with coffee while carrying the weight of extreme survival. "You don't seek recognition," Harris said finally. Voice soft, and yet everyone here senses it. They recognize something extraordinary, even if they don't understand it. Her lips curved into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "Recognition is unnecessary. Understanding is sufficient. Those who endure the impossible do not need validation. Authority is earned silently, through action and endurance. Those who cannot comprehend it will never see it. Those who can will recognize it without words." Harris felt a profound shift in his perception of command and authority. He had mocked her earlier, dismissed her, underestimated her. Now he understood that true leadership, true strength, was not demonstrated through words or rank, but through endurance, skill, and the quiet confidence of survival. She had faced death repeatedly, yet she moved through the world with calm precision, teaching lessons far beyond what rank or medal could convey. He noticed the faint scar along her temple again, the subtle calluses on her hands, the precise stitching on her jacket, marks of countless operations, repairs in the field, endurance in extreme conditions. Every detail told a story of survival, each imperfection a testament to experience. Harris realized that his own accolades felt hollow compared to the tangible proof of endurance she carried effortlessly. The woman finally placed her coffee cup on the tray, fingers lingering briefly over the Raven emblem. "Colonel," she said quietly, "do not mistake humility for weakness. Survival requires strength beyond what medals represent, beyond what words convey. Authority is silent, earned through action, and carried through endurance. Remember this." Harris exhaled, fully aware that he had been humbled. He had encountered legends in reports, in whispers, and in top-secret files, but he had never truly met one until now. And the lesson was undeniable. Mock a civilian, and you might find yourself confronted by something far greater, a living embodiment of the Raven unit's silent authority, endurance, and legendary presence. For a long moment, they sat in silence, the cafeteria returning to its normal rhythm around them. Yet Harris knew this encounter had changed something fundamental. He had seen authority not in medals or commands, but in survival, experience, and calm mastery over impossible circumstances. The Raven unit's legend was not abstract. It was here, alive, and undeniable. Finally, she stood, the motion fluid, controlled, almost effortless. Harris felt a subtle tension, as though the room itself recognized the shift. She moved with the quiet precision of someone trained to navigate danger at every moment, a living reminder of the discipline and skill she had honed over countless missions. Harris realized she was leaving, but the presence she carried remained, like a shadow etched into the room. Colonel Harris watched her rise from the chair, every motion precise, deliberate, and fluid, a reflection of countless hours spent navigating danger. The raven emblem caught the light one last time, black threads glinting faintly, a silent testament to missions endured and lives saved. Soldiers around the cafeteria instinctively drew back, sensing the aura of authority she radiated, though none fully comprehended its origin. Whispers rose and fell like a tide. It's her. It has to be a raven. Alive? Harris remained still, captivated, fully aware that this was a moment few would ever witness. She moved toward the exit with a calm inevitability, each step measured, grounded, purposeful. Harris noticed the way she carried herself, not like someone seeking attention, but like someone whose every action conveyed confidence, skill, and discipline born of extremes. The civilian jacket seemed almost symbolic now, a contrast to the power and experience that radiated from her every movement. This was not a soldier defined by uniform or rank. She was defined by endurance, survival, and silent authority. Harris realized as she approached the door that he had been naive. He had mocked her appearance, underestimated her presence, and assumed ordinary strength could measure against extraordinary experience. And yet, here she was, moving through the room with the ease of someone who had survived the impossible repeatedly. The cafeteria felt suspended in time, every glance, every whisper, every shuffling tray fading into insignificance compared to her presence. "You understand now," she said quietly, voice low but carrying an unmistakable authority, that survival and endurance are not measured by medals or rank. They are earned silently, through experience, skill, and the relentless pursuit of mastery. Those who understand this recognize it immediately. Those who do not will never see it. Harris nodded slowly, a mixture of awe, humility, and respect settling over him. He had commanded troops for decades, faced crises that demanded every ounce of his skill and judgment, yet he felt the weight of his own limitations now. This woman, this raven, had operated beyond comprehension, carrying the lives of others, navigating conditions that would crush ordinary soldiers, and yet she did so with calm, measured precision. Authority had never been so palpable, so immediate, so utterly undeniable dot around them. Soldiers continued to whisper, eyes following her, some openly gawking, others trying to process what they were witnessing. A few young lieutenants exchanged nervous glances, barely believing that a living member of the Raven unit had passed through their midst, silent and composed. Harris knew that the impression she left behind would linger long after she had departed. Every glance toward the door, every murmur, every heartbeat in the room was now imbued with awareness of her presence, her skill, and the legend she embodied. Reached the exit, pausing for a fraction of a second, as if acknowledging Harris directly. Her eyes met his gray gaze, calm, unwavering, and carrying the weight of unspoken understanding. "Do not forget what you have witnessed here, Colonel," she said softly, voice steady and deliberate. "Respect is not demanded, it is recognized. Authority is earned through endurance, not ceremony, and survival. Survival is the ultimate measure." Harris exhaled slowly, feeling the gravity of her words. He had mocked her earlier, underestimated her, and yet she had already claimed his respect through quiet authority and mastery of survival. The lessons she imparted were not theoretical. They were embodied in every movement, every glance, every deliberate step she took toward the door. As she passed through the threshold, the room seemed to exhale. The chatter resumed gradually, though it was now punctuated by cautious reverence. Soldiers stole glances at the empty corner table, some whispering, others sitting in stunned silence. Harris remained seated for a long moment, processing the encounter, absorbing the magnitude of what had just transpired. The Raven unit was no longer abstract, no longer a legend written in files or whispered rumors. It was real, tangible, and undeniably present. He rose slowly, moving toward the exit, though he knew he would not catch her. The woman's presence was already fading into the hallways, yet the impact remained. Harris felt a subtle shiver of awareness. He had been in the presence of someone who had defied death repeatedly, who had endured situations beyond ordinary comprehension, and who had carried it all with calm, deliberate authority. She had taught him lessons about survival, discipline, and leadership without raising her voice, without demonstrating force, without seeking recognition. Harris reflected on the Raven emblem again, the black thread glinting faintly in the fluorescent light. It was more than a symbol. It was a record of survival, endurance, and silent mastery. He realized that authority was not conferred by medals or rank. It was earned in the crucible of experience, tempered by survival, and carried with quiet precision. The lessons he had learned from this encounter would linger, reshaping the way he viewed leadership, courage, and the limits of human capability. The young soldiers in the cafeteria, still whispering, began to exchange impressions, a mix of awe and disbelief coloring their voices. Some were inspired, others intimidated, yet all had witnessed something extraordinary. The Raven unit, long thought mythical by most, had walked among them, quiet and unassuming, leaving an indelible mark on their perception of authority and survival. Harris recognized that he, too, had been transformed by the encounter, not just by what she had said, but by the very essence of her presence. He thought about the countless missions he had overseen, the strategies he had planned, the lives he had guided. Yet all of that seemed pale compared to the lesson he had just learned. Endurance, skill, and quiet authority mattered more than ceremony, more than rank, more than medals. True command came from experience, survival, and the ability to act decisively under conditions where ordinary people would falter. Harris exhaled, running a hand over his face. The cafeteria, once ordinary, now felt charged with residual tension and awe. The Raven had passed through, quiet and unassuming, yet leaving behind a presence that could not be ignored. He realized that for the soldiers who had glimpsed her, this would be a defining moment, a story they would carry forward in whispered conversation and careful reflection. And for Harris himself, it was a lesson in humility, endurance, and the silent power of survival. He stepped toward the hallway, where she had disappeared, just in time to catch a glimpse of her disappearing figure. The precision in her movements, the calm certainty, the sense that she was always prepared for the impossible, it all reinforced what he had already understood. This was not just a soldier. This was a living legend, the embodiment of the Raven. Unit's enduring legacy. As the echoes of her presence faded into the hallways, Harris stood still, reflecting on the encounter. The lessons were clear, yet profound. Authority is silent, endurance is essential, and true command is earned in the crucible of survival. The Raven unit was no myth. It was real, alive, and undeniable. And for the first time in decades, Harris understood what it truly meant to witness legend firsthand. The cafeteria slowly returned to its ordinary rhythm, trays clattering, conversations resuming, but the atmosphere had shifted. Soldiers moved differently. Whispers continued, eyes occasionally darting toward the empty corner table. Harris felt the lingering weight of the encounter settle over him, a mixture of respect, humility, and awe. The Raven had come, had imparted her lessons silently and had vanished. Yet the impact of her presence would endure far longer than the moment itself. Harris returned to his chair, exhaling deeply. He knew that the story he had witnessed would stay with him, shaping how he approached command, leadership, and understanding. Human resilience, the Raven unit was more than legend. It was a standard, a measure of endurance and authority that few could comprehend, and he had been fortunate enough to witness it in action. Colonel Harris stood at the threshold of the cafeteria, eyes following the faint outline of the woman as she disappeared down the hall. The Raven emblem on her jacket lingered in his memory, a symbol of survival, endurance, and authority beyond comprehension. For a moment, the room felt impossibly quiet, as though the air itself acknowledged the weight of her presence and the lessons she had imparted without uttering more than necessary. He exhaled slowly, absorbing the gravity of the encounter. Every gesture, every word, every glance had been deliberate, a masterclass in discipline and the subtle power of survival. Harris realized, painfully and humbly, that the woman had done more than impress him. She had transformed the way he understood leadership. Authority, he now knew, was not a medal pinned to a chest or a rank on a collar. It was endurance. It was focus under impossible conditions. It was surviving where others failed. Around the cafeteria, soldiers had resumed their routines, but the atmosphere had shifted permanently. Whispered questions floated in the air. Who was she really? Was that a Raven unit operative? How can anyone survive what she has? Harris could see the effect on younger lieutenants, their admiration tinged with a mixture of fear and awe. For all their training and drills, they had witnessed something they could not replicate, something that existed beyond the ordinary measures of skill and courage. He returned to his chair, hands gripping the edges tightly. The hum of activity in the cafeteria now seemed trivial compared to the weight of what had occurred. Harris reflected on the lessons he had witnessed firsthand: humility, patience, endurance, and the quiet authority of someone who had mastered survival to a degree that mere reports and simulations could never convey. The Raven unit was no longer an abstract legend. It was tangible, and she, in her calm, unassuming presence, had embodied every aspect of it. Harris leaned back, mind racing. He had commanded operations in foreign theaters, planned high-risk missions, and faced death in countless forms. Yet he understood now that all of it was dwarfed by what the Raven unit demanded of its members. Survival at extreme altitudes, under hostile conditions, in enemy territory, these were realms where ordinary soldiers failed. And she had thrived, carrying not just her own life, but the weight of her comrades and missions beyond reckoning. He recalled her words, her calm authority, her insistence that recognition was unnecessary and understanding was sufficient. How many leaders in his experience could claim such quiet mastery? Few, he realized. The lessons embedded in her presence could not be taught in classrooms or demonstrated in drills. They had to be lived, endured, survived, and mastered over and over, under conditions that stripped away ego, fear, and weakness alike. Harris's eyes fell again on the empty corner table. The coffee cup she had used remained, an ordinary object. In an extraordinary encounter, he realized that the Raven had left no fanfare, no spectacle, no attempt to impress. Her departure had been as controlled, deliberate, and quiet as her presence had been commanding. Yet the impression she had left was indelible. Soldiers would talk, whisper, and speculate, but few would ever truly grasp the depth of what they had glimpsed. He thought of the faint scars along her hands, the careful stitching on her jacket, the calluses formed in impossible conditions. Each mark told a story of survival, precision, and discipline under duress. Harris realized that what he had mocked as a civilian jacket was actually a record of endurance, a map of challenges conquered and obstacles overcome. Every detail of her appearance was deliberate, intentional, and emblematic of her mastery over environments that would crush ordinary soldiers. A young lieutenant approached cautiously, voice low and reverent. "Colonel, was that? Really? A member of the Raven unit?" Harris nodded slowly, not trusting himself to speak immediately. He understood now that this encounter had changed him, reshaped his perception of command and authority, and left him humbled in a way that decades of leadership had not. "Yes," he said finally, voice steady but tinged with awe. "It was her. And if you ever doubt the meaning of discipline, endurance, and true authority, remember what you saw today." The lieutenant's eyes widened, a mixture of reverence and disbelief. Harris allowed a faint smile, acknowledging the gravity of what they had witnessed. The Raven unit was a standard, a measure, and a legacy. And today, a living embodiment of that standard had walked among them, teaching lessons that could not be written, narrated, or simulated. They had seen mastery in motion. They had seen survival perfected. Harris stood, moving to glance toward the hallway where she had disappeared. Though she was gone from sight, her presence lingered, invisible yet palpable. He felt the weight of her authority, the lessons she had imparted without fanfare, and the clarity of perspective she had forced upon him. Leadership was no longer about rank or medals. It was about endurance, focus, and the capacity to survive and lead where ordinary measures failed. He thought back to her instructions, her calm explanation that authority is earned in silence and through action. The lesson was profound. Those who understand the extreme nature of survival recognize it immediately, while those who cannot will never see it. Harris knew that he, too, had been given insight into something rare, something legendary, something that would influence his command decisions, his training of troops, and his understanding of human potential for years to come. Soldiers continued to eat, converse, and move about. Yet Harris knew the cafeteria would never feel ordinary again. Every glance toward the empty corner table carried curiosity and quiet respect. Every whispered speculation reminded him that the Raven had left her mark without intention, without spectacle. She had imparted lessons that transcended rank, authority, or ceremony, lessons that existed in presence, endurance, and experience. Alone, Harris felt a shift inside himself, a deep, humbling recognition that he had been privileged to witness mastery firsthand. The Raven unit was not myth. It was real. And she had proven that mastery was not about recognition, ego, or outward display. It was about survival, discipline, and calm authority under extreme conditions. He exhaled, a sense of calm and understanding settling over him. He would never forget this encounter. He would remember her words, her presence, and the lessons she had silently imparted. Authority could not be taught. It could only be earned through endurance and demonstrated through action. Survival was the ultimate measure, and the Raven unit, as embodied in her, was the pinnacle of that measure. Harris sat for a long moment, absorbing the quiet weight of her influence. He understood now that his own experiences, while significant, were limited compared to the mastery required to survive and thrive in the extreme conditions she had endured. The Raven had demonstrated something profound, that true power and authority exist not in medals or commands, but in the silent mastery of survival and the ability to act decisively where ordinary men fail. He glanced one final time toward the hallway, imagining her figure disappearing into the distance. The lesson remained. Endurance, discipline, and calm authority define the extraordinary. Recognition is irrelevant. Understanding is sufficient. And for those who have seen it firsthand, the memory is indelible, shaping perception, inspiring reverence, and leaving an imprint that lasts far longer than the fleeting moment of observation. Colonel Harris finally rose, a mixture of humility, awe, and determination settling over him. He understood that the Raven unit was more than legend. It was a standard, a measure of human capability, a testament to endurance, and a reminder that authority comes not from rank, but from survival, perfected through action. As he walked out of the cafeteria, Harris carried with him the lessons of the encounter, the quiet power of experience, the discipline forged in extremes, and the undeniable authority of someone who had endured what few could imagine. He had witnessed legend, and in that moment, he understood that the Raven unit was not just a story, it was a living, breathing measure of human potential, and she was its perfect embodiment, the memory of the Raven, of her presence, and of the lessons she imparted silently would remain with him forever, a reminder that true authority is earned in the crucible of survival, and that ordinary appearances can conceal the extraordinary. Harris knew he would never forget the day the Raven walked among them, changed everything, and left without a word, leaving behind nothing but quiet reverence, enduring awe, and a lesson in mastery that could never be erased.